Go back to the first moment when we see Abraham giving a sacrifice. I think we have to, when we begin to dive into this, we're not doing animal sacrifices today. So animal sacrifices were a very public thing, but animal sacrifices were public based off your public sin. So, if you get into Ecclesiastes, or excuse me, Leviticus, you'll see, like, let's say a high priest committed an unintentional sin. That's a word you see attached to it. So a sin that he becomes aware of that he unintentionally did, then a sacrifice was required for a high priest. It was of a fatted bull, and it varied down to, some it was a goat or whatever it may be. There's different requirements for the different place and who you are. High priest, it's a pretty intentional or unintentional sin. If he's done something, he's aware of a lot of sin, so it's a big one. But what was required in the public sacrifice is for that high priest to walk up and put his hand on the head of the cow when it was slain, because in that moment, it's not to exemplify the priest on the size of the sacrifice he gave, it's to hold him accountable for the sin he committed. So in that moment, and in the way now for us, even though we don't publicly sacrifice things, sacrifice is meant to, it can, if we're not careful, exemplify us, because we're not sacrificing animals. So when we look, and it's why I think Jesus said, when you fast, don't go talking about your fast and tell about your fast, because in that moment of sacrifice, you can be glorified by what you're doing. Oh, look at what you're giving up. Oh, look at what you don't watch. And this is the problem with American Christian or all that, is we get so defined by our sacrifice, and what it ends up doing is glorifying us. Obedience is greater than sacrifice because obedience glorifies God. So our sacrifice, if it's based on obedience, people will watch us, see the fruits of what we're doing, and begin to ask questions. And it's not, I'm doing this because I know I read the Bible and it tells me to do it. I'm doing this because I feel led to do it. So then it's never an accusation of, Aaron, why aren't you fasting like me? Because no, this is where God's called me, and I'm just being obedient to what he's telling me to do, and I'm trusting him in the process. If you go back to Abraham and his first sacrifice, I think this is an important piece that I missed until today when I was processing and think of this. So Abraham, when he's walking up with Isaac to go for the sacrifice, he's been told he's now being obedient to go sacrifice your son. Imagine if he had took his two servants that were with him up there, who would have been glorified or could have been glorified in that moment. Abraham could, because of, look at me, I'm trusting God and all these. He released them because they had no intimate connection with this. And he only took up him, who was being obedient, and Isaac, who needed to understand something. Not that his dad was obedient, but that God was his provider. Think about this. In this moment, Abraham's about to sacrifice Isaac. So in the eyes of Isaac, he sees the end of him. In this moment, Abraham is not his provider anymore. You may have gave me breath, but now you're taking it because God told you to do it. When he stops his hand, now Isaac sees God as his provider. It's the moment it becomes his God, not just his daddy's God. And then he supplies the ram of sacrifice in that moment. So in that moment of obedience for Abraham and Isaac, there's an intimate connection to who God is and what results from that. I think in our life, we need to be better at being obedient to God.